Hi, baby boomer fans. We are Jackie and Janine, the Pfeiffer Sisters, and love to talk about the 1950s, inviting you to reminisce with us as we explore experiences of that decade. Grab your favorite malt or Green River. Make sure you are wide awake and get ready to be inspired about the 1950s. Welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat.
Hi, friends. Thank you for joining us today, and welcome back to another wonderful story about that 1950s, maybe even going into the 1960s decade that has been so influential in the lives of folks who are living and enjoying life no matter what age you are. So here we go, Jackie. How can you start our program?
Greetings, everyone. Please take notice of the purple banner below. While the Windmill Watch is a very important and informative site. We invite you to go there to find out about the book, which is in the upper right-hand corner, the vendors, where you might be seeing Janine and me, and of course the 1950s Fun Chat. This is number 168. Is that right?
Mm-hmm, that's right.
Yes. Okay. So there's plenty of viewing opportunity there. The book, as I was mentioning up in that corner, is called While the Windmill Watched, A Slice of Rural America in the 1950s. And that little white dot below, which you cannot read, says that it won the Independent Press Award as the distinguished favorite in the regional category. And this was in 2022, which is a year after it was published. Well, let's begin.
Yes.
We have, during our young years, many of us were influenced by our local church ladies. One of those who has been impacted by a circle of older women in her community. Rhea was born in the June of 1960 and grew up on a dairy farm near Millansburg, Iowa. She graduated from Deep River Millersburg High School and continued her education at Hawkeye Community College in Waterloo, Iowa, by earning an associate's degree in interior design. While attending college, she met her husband, Randy. They were married in 1980. Most of her married years, her career has the title of stay-at-home mom, but she occasionally subbed in the school cafeteria. Rhea and Randy have three grown children: Nathan, who has a wife named Shannon; Jess, who has a husband named Brad; and Tyler, who has a wife named Lauren, and three grandchildren, and they are great, I'm sure. Jay, 13, Seth, 10, Sophie, almost 12. The couple resides in Walford, Iowa. So welcome to the 1950s Fun Chat, Rhea.
Hello.
Hello. Yes. I'll begin by inviting you to expound on this leadoff topic of the many ways the older women in your church influenced your life.
Well, the other day I was looking on Facebook and I saw an article, I think it came from a book it was called The Older Women in the Church. And as I read it, it made me think about all the older ladies that influenced me as I grew up in a local church. It was a small church on the Diamond Trail Road between Deep River and Millersburg.
And in Iowa.
In Iowa, yes. The Diamond Trail Road goes from Des Moines to Iowa City. So, and at that time there wasn't Interstate 80, so it was a main thoroughfare. So some older men, they decided they wanted to start a church, and they wanted it on a main road to attract people to come.
Sure, good idea. And the church then was a certain denomination or a community church, or how did
it was actually a non-denominational church, or it's still going. They just celebrated their 100 years this year. The congregation is very small and older, so not sure how much longer they'll keep going, but I hope they keep going. I hope it grows. It was a wonderful church to grow up in.
How about a little history? Why is that called the Diamond Trail?
I really don't know. I really have no idea why that road was called the Diamond Trail. I just, if you look on the map, the road map, it's still called the Diamond Trail to this day.
Huh.
Oh, okay.
Well,
All
we'll
right.
have to check that out.
So this collection of people who all came together to join in this church consisted of, was it only rural people, or was it rural people and townspeople?
Mostly rural people. A few came out from the town of Millersburg. It was a little closer to Millersburg, but the mailing address was Deep River. But a lot of it was rural. So there was, I've got to check my notes here a minute.
Yeah.
There was a huge revival in 1921 through the Billy Sunday stuff, and a lot of there was groups that they went to Sigourney or Keswick, and my great grandfather was one of them, and Alfred Wyatt and a few others. They went, and they were farmers in that area, and as 1922 rolled around, they decided they wanted to have this church. And by the end of 23, if I understand the history right, they had enough money raised by then, and they had bought 2 small churches that had since their congregations dwindled down, and they were hauling them down the Diamond Trail to put together on the property that they are still on to this day. And the interesting part, it got stuck, and they blocked the road all winter.
Oh my
goodness. And then as weather got better, they were able to finish pulling them. I think somehow they made it so people could go around them, but they were stuck on the road.
Yes.
That was a news story.
Yeah.
When they were moving those churches, were they on flatbeds of a truck?
I would assume. I really don't know, and I have never seen pictures of that. I was looking to see if I had, and I don't have any pictures of the 2 church buildings. And you can still to this day kind of tell whether there was 2 buildings put together. It just kind of has that look to it.
Well, as that congregation came together, and as it grew, there are husbands and wives and children, and so much activity, I would imagine, within that church. And oftentimes the organization and the activities in a local church are authored by the women in the family. And so
I kind of describe it as the men ran the upstairs and the ladies ran the basement.
Yes. Yes. And how did they run that basement?
Well, they did a good job. When I was younger, they remodeled the basement so that it was more efficient, and I can remember them digging out. There used to be like a wall that kind of only came up so far, and they would use it as like a shelf for things, and that was dug out, and some rooms were added underneath to make more Sunday school rooms because they needed more Sunday school class space. And they remodeled the kitchen and put a window so that things could be handed out. In that kitchen, you had to step up, a pretty good step, a little higher than your normal step to step up into it. And that was how they ran things. I have one picture from a wedding, and it looks to me like it was before. I don't know if you can see that.
Yes.
This is not in the kitchen.
Okay.
I think it was before they used the kitchen as kitchen, like it was used. Some of those things were before my time, so I don't remember. And I was hoping that somebody could tell me some more about it. And I read through the church history book, but it didn't really say much about it. So I don't really know.
Did you have running water and sewer system to it?
By time I was along, yes. I don't remember early what happened. Maybe they didn't in the early years, but by the 60s they did.
Okay. So was there one lady who just was usually in charge of the activities in the basement?
I don't think so. It was a group of ladies. They all worked together. I know here in the last few years they would split up into like a couple groups that they would take turns, but I don't remember that as a child. It just seemed like they all were in charge and they all knew what to do. We would have we would start with opening ceremonies for Sunday school on Sunday morning for the kids, and Lucille always had it. Lucille Wilhite was a lady who I think she had wanted to be a missionary, but that didn't work out, and she married a farmer there, and so her heart was a mission to kids. And I can remember singing songs. And as I mentioned earlier in the Facebook post that I shared, I learned to march in the infantry. And so many of those songs that kids nowadays don't even know these songs, barely hear them. And there always was actions. And she always had, I think she had a big part in us learning to read, because all these songs, she had so many different, I don't know what to call them, but they had the words on them, and she would go through them. Some of them would be books, and she would flip through the pages as we sing. I'm sure it had a big part in our learning to read. Yes. And then she would have a little story, and then we'd go off to our classes. And I grew up in a family that lived, almost all my relatives lived right there. So there was probably, you'd say, 2 families that had a big part in this church, that they were kind of just because we all lived around there. I grew up probably within 10 miles of almost all of my cousins, my aunts and uncles, my grandparents. So it was always like family reunion every Sunday when we went. And there was another family that had the same thing, that had a lot of them. And then there was, there was some that weren't related, but by the time we grew up, I think we all kind of felt like we were related, it was that church, you just.
Yeah. Well, did Lucille, or did she ever have a flannel graph for you to participate in?
Oh, yes. And she wasn't the only one. I can remember another lady, Jenny Merrick, teach. That's where I heard Pilgrim's Progress, that book, on a Thursday night class. We would have Thursday night, and we would have classes, and that's how I heard the story of Pilgrim's Progress. She did that one.
Yeah. Did Lucille play the piano, the upright piano too, or the organ?
I don't remember her playing. My aunts and many other relatives, a couple of my aunts, well, one lady wasn't actually my aunt, but she was my mom's cousin, and with living so close, she basically became an aunt. I think we used to call her Aunt Shirley, even though she wasn't. But she played I think she played the piano. I know my Aunt Janice did. There was several different people that played. There was always piano players.
So when you started Sunday school, how old were you?
I think we were 2 when we started. They started us at a very young. It was a nursery class, and if not 2, it was shortly after that. It seemed like I always went to Sunday school class.
Sure.
And we did not have a nursery, so you sat through church with your parents.
Sure.
Right.
Sure.
At that time.
From age 2 up through those years in Sunday school class. Do you remember anything specific in any of those classes which really was taught to you and is an influential part of your life today?
Oh, you know, we always had the Bible, the stories, and every one of the teachers, every one of those ladies made it a point that each story, how to apply it to your daily life, or how apply it to your life. Verse memorization was a huge.
Yes.
It didn't matter whether it was Thursday class or it was Sunday school class on Sunday. We also had church on Sunday night. So, we'd have classes even then. So every part of it was taught to you as to how to apply it to your daily life and daily living. And so it just was, they just always were a part of it. And missions was always a big part of that church also. The ladies had a group called Missionary Circle. And a lot of them sewed, and we would sew things to send to missionaries. Later in life, they tried to teach me to quilt. I can't quilt.
Okay. You have other skills.
Yes, I have other skills.
Yes.
I don't have the patience to do it, but I can remember they would bring in a missionary circle. They would bring in the quilt rack thing, and they would sit around it and they'd be talking and they'd be quilting. And I was pregnant with my daughter at the time, and there was this really pretty quilt they were making, and they just said they were doing it for whoever, whatever, didn't really say what. And they tried to get me, and I think I have 2 stitches on that quilt. I said, this is not working. And I was.
They were hand quilting then.
Yes, hand quilting.
Oh,
they were hand quilt. These were not machine quilted. They were hand quilted. And ended up, when my daughter was born, she got the quilt.
Oh, sweet.
She's on, and I think she still has that quilt yet.
Well, I'm glad you had a couple stitches in it.
Yes, I do have a couple stitches in it, but that was it.
Was your pastor and his family a part of your community, or was he a traveling pastor?
We built a house there. There is a house right beside that church.
Oh,
and so there, the pastors. Yes, it's right beside it. That might be a little too close for some pastors, but they just got a new pastor after going 2 years without a pastor, and he lives in the house. Him and his wife live in the house.
Oh,
still.
good.
And they've gone through several rounds of remodeling it, and I think they had to rebuild the garage because it collapsed. I can't remember whether a child ran into it or what. I don't remember exactly the story.
Is the community then quite affluent, so that the farmers can support it?
Well, yes, to an extent. There was the men also had an organization called Christian Farmers, and it was several of the churches, from Victor to several that were close around there, and one that was towards Williamsburg. And I think they invited from other communities, Keswick, Sigourney, down that area. And the women would cook meals for the men. They would come in and the women would cook meals for them, and they would have this meeting once a month. And in fact, I think I've seen some pictures. There was also a Bible camp that they started 20 years after the church behind the camp, behind the church. And it is still going today, too.
That is wonderful.
And
is the camp just for children, or is it for adults or families?
Well, they have kids camps in the summertime, and then Labor Day weekend they have family camp. And our daughter and her family and us the last 2 years have camped back there during family camp. And That's been a lot of fun because that has changed over the years. I grew up going to camp, and it is so different. But the young men that run it, they grew up going to camp and are from families of the area and moved back to take over. And they have really done a great job of updating it and making it a very good camp again. Mm-hmm. Different organizations rent it for retreats. And so they stay pretty busy year round. Mm-hmm. They can't use all the cabins, but they have built some buildings that they can use in the winter months for the retreats and stuff.
Oh, nice. So Rhea, I'm going to go back to when you were a little girl in that church. Did you ever play the part of Mary in a Christmas program?
I think we all want to do that.
I think once I did.
Well, good for you.
I'm not sure. Yeah. But we always had Christmas programs. We always had vacation Bible school. Mm-hmm. I'm talking with my daughter about this. I said the funny thing, they would have vacation Bible school right after school got out. Mm-hmm. And they would take a 10-day program and do it in 5 days. Oh, so we had all day Bible school. They figured we just got done with all day school. We could do all day Bible school. Okay. And they would provide sack lunches. Okay, it would just be a simple sandwich, maybe an apple. And remember the big boxes of potato chips? They would rebag them. I can't remember the brand name, but they would be in a box. Oh. And they would rebag them in little amounts for us to each have. We'd have some potato chips, and there would be homemade cookies. Lots of homemade cookies because that was the snack. And probably Kool-Aid. Yeah. Yes, probably Kool-Aid. Yeah. I was trying to think. I couldn't remember the drink. But now that you say that, I'm like, yep, it probably was Kool-Aid.
Yeah. Oh, how nice.
And it would taste so good. And I said, I could make that now, and it still just would not taste the same. They just, as a kid, those things taste so good, and you try to recreate it, and you just can't. There's some things you just can't.
Do you remember what games you played when you had a recess during Bible school?
Oh, Ring Around the Rosie always was a popular one.
Yes.
I can't remember the name of the one when something come on over.
Red Rover.
Red Rover. Yes, that's it. Yeah. I remember those.
Yeah. And how about when surely there was an offering taken at Sunday school class? And especially when you were little, did you have to be very, very careful how you carried that offering, or did you have a little purse? Or
I remember, now that you say that, I remember my mom taking a handkerchief, because everybody had handkerchiefs.
Yeah.
And she would put it in the handkerchief and kind of tie it above the money. Yeah. So then when you got to Sunday school, you opened it up and you put that offering in. And then as I got older, I had to just, carry it in my hand. I remember at Easter having hats.
Yes.
Still, but only at Easter instead of every Sunday, and having a little purse then that I carried. But it seemed like I only remember carrying it at Easter for some reason.
I'm a little white glove.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And black patent leather shoes, maybe?
Yes. Black patent leather shoes. Yeah, I think everybody and white ones for Easter. You'd have white shoes for Easter, black for Christmas or in the wintertime.
Yeah. Yep.
And I bought my granddaughter her first pair of black shoes for the winter this year.
Yes. Does she like them?
She hasn't gotten them yet, so she doesn't.
Okay. Were you of the age where you were, when you were little, where you were still could wear a crinoline slip underneath your dress?
I can remember having one, but it was mainly because of a school program that I was in kindergarten. Okay. But I really only had it for one certain dress. I can remember wearing slips.
Okay.
which my kids would just my daughter would kind of go, huh?
Yes.
But yeah, we'd have slips, but I think I only had one crinoline one, and it was for a certain dress that I had for a school program.
Okay.
But we always dressed up for church, always had a dress on.
Yes.
And my grandmother would sew a lot of my dresses. I actually had a cousin who was my age, and then there were two girls quite a bit younger. There were 16 of us grandkids, and only 4 of us were girls.
Oh.
And she would make us matching dresses.
Oh, nice. Yes.
So all our lives, my cousin and I end up growing up having matching clothes.
Yeah.
After I was in 4th grade when my grandmother passed away. And so my grandpa would take us shopping, and we had to find matching clothes. And we did not have the same clothing taste, my cousin and I. And one time we finally talked him into letting us get 2 sweaters. And I think I wore one always, and she wore the other one always.
Well, that takes homage for Grandpa.
Enough of that matchy for you, huh?
Yes. But yeah, it was a church. These ladies sewed a lot, all of them. And there was one lady that if you needed something special sewed, she sewed it. Helen Horse, she was quite the seamstress. She made many wedding dresses. She made many she made my bridesmaids' dresses. And because they were lined, it would cost a little bit more. And she charged, I think it was $10 to make them.
Oh,
because they were lined.
yes. What a gift.
That we had already bought the material and the pattern and everything. So
Let's go back again to that middle time in America where families, especially in small communities, really bonded together.
yes.
And were neighborly, helped each other, and the church was such a huge influence in the lives
Yes.
of those families. But tell me about, do you remember anything about local folks being married in that church other than what you
yes.
talked about?
There is a poem about this church. This is part of that I have somewhere that was written about a couple that got married right after church on Sunday. Everybody stayed. It was a potluck. And this couple got married right after church and had a couple people stand up for them. And then the church all went down for a potluck, it sounded like in this poem. It was before my time, but yes.
Was there a wedding cake?
I don't know. I don't know if there was a wedding cake. I don't remember it being in the poem.
Oh, okay.
The poem was more talking about just the people that stood up and the people that were there. And so the man who wrote the poem, he was quite the character, but he was great. If you were in the hospital, you got a postcard from him, and he hand drew like a cartoon on the outside.
Oh,
It was, and he was very musical, him and his daughter. We always had special music at church. And if you couldn't sing, you read a poem or you played an instrument or whatever. They just, and it passed around the church. It wasn't the same person getting up.
Yes.
Can you tell me, when you were young, can you give us an average of about how many congregants there were in that church?
It was pretty full. I don't know how many people it would hold. I would probably say 75, maybe. I don't know exactly because I don't know how many the church holds. But it was pretty full. Family sizes were bigger back then too. We had a couple families that would have 8, 9, 10 kids. So that would.
2 pews.
So is there a cemetery in next year?
Yes, there's a cemetery right beside it. My parents are buried there along with, so my daughter counted up and we have 5 generations of grandparents buried there.
Wow.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so does anyone in your family have an original homestead that they're living on?
I have to think a minute. Well, I have a cousin who lives on, would have been my great-grandparents' farm.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, when his parents lived there in the one house, they built a little house, and they weren't the first ones to live there. There was other family members throughout that, there was others from the family a little further out that lived in it too. There was a little cement block house built that my great-grandmother lived in.
Oh, my.
I have a picture here.
Yes. I'm going to put you on the solo layout so we can see the picture better.
Okay. I have to find. This is my great-grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary.
Oh, it looks like there was a lot of family there.
Yeah.
My goodness. What year was that?
Before I was born. So
Okay.
I have the article here, 1953. This was my great-grandparents.
Yes. Yes.
And it says 1953 beside the article. So yes, quite a while.
When people would have funerals in the church, more than likely there was food served.
Lots of it.
Yeah. Do you remember, were there special recipes that these church women would make for everything?
Well, so probably the funeral that probably, as my childhood, that I remember the most was my grandmother, since I was so young when she passed away. And I know before the funeral, they had the ladies had cooked a meal for the whole family, and it was ham and potatoes. I think it was like scallop potatoes, but ham slices, not ham in the scallop potatoes, and green beans, maybe something else, and probably some bread, but that's what I remember. And then there was like a quick luncheon afterwards, which in that church would mean it was probably cakes and cookies and bars, and I don't think there would have been pie, but there might have been, because my grandpa really liked pie. And I can remember receiving them, there being so much food at my grandpa's house, because all these later ladies and neighbors, and they just brought in food for everyone. And there was a lot that got frozen, got sent home with everybody. Afterwards, it just was a ton of food.
That's a love gift.
Yes.
So often we use food as a love gift, and I think especially during the death of someone, and
yes,
in the celebration of that person's life too.
Yes.
Do you remember any Jell-O being involved?
Oh, Jell-O was always involved in a lot of it. My favorite was, it was always Jell-O with, I think it was cinnamon red hots that they would melt into it with the hot water, and then it would have apples and walnuts and celery in it. That was my favorite, but there would be a lot of cream. In fact, my daughter and I made a cookbook of my recipe out of my grandma's recipe file, just a real thin one. And they were all, Jessie was like, all the salads are Jell-O. I said, yeah, because you didn't buy lettuce, really. You didn't hardly get much lettuce. And so Jell-O that was your salad. People raised lettuce at home, but you couldn't go to the store and buy it. Not really.
Unless it was iceberg.
Yes. And it just seemed like meals were cabbage, because most of these ladies all had great big gardens. So there'd be cabbage, and I can remember Jell-O salads with cabbage in them.
Oh yes.
And there would be cabbage salads. There would be a lot of lettuce or Jell-O salads. I don't remember there being a lot of lettuce salads ever.
No.
not even the pasta salads that you get nowadays.
Yeah, I think pasta salad, from what I recall, came about years later.
Yes, I agree. I don't
But
remember that you could get, I mean, my mom used to make a macaroni salad, but all you seemed to be able to get was the elbow macaroni. We couldn't get really any of it. You didn't get the other types of pasta, but we also didn't shop in big grocery stores. Millersburg's a little tiny town, and it had 2 grocery stores at one time.
Oh, wow. That might have seemed very progressive at the time.
Oh, yeah. One had its own locker in it, and then the other one was just a grocery store. I can remember going in with my mom. Very small. It was a very small grocery store.
Yep. So we have just a few minutes left, Rhea. I'm going back to the church ladies again, and you mentioned Lucille, you mentioned Jenny, and then there was a Helen who you mentioned. Is there a one word that summarizes your feelings, of your remembrances of
all of those ladies and more?
Yeah.
You were always loved. You were always loved, and they always wanted the best for each and every child. There was a couple ladies, Loretta and Alice, and to this day I could hear them sitting beside each other just laughing, and somebody said actually cackling was a good way. That was just the way they laughed. That's meant with love, that word. And they always just, all of those ladies, my grandmother, my aunts, and all these other ladies, they just loved each child, and they just wanted what was best for each of them.
Yeah.
And music was a huge part in that church too. So we all had to learn to sing. You learn parts in the hymns. You'd learn parts more because you just hear them around you, not necessarily that you read the music. It was just that you hear the different parts of music are being sung around you.
Yes. Well, I think you've done a marvelous job of giving us a bit of history of what it was like to grow up in a small country church, and that's what's so neat to hear be included in the stories of the 1950s and 60s and the influence of that time too. Thanks.
Yes.
We really appreciate you having been our guest today.
Yes, thank you. Well done.
Yep. Jackie, can you conclude our program today?
Only that we would appreciate having you return to the 1950s Fun Chat next week, where we'll have another guest with another bit of history of rural America in the 1950s. So until next time, tell your friends, even your relatives, about the 1950s Fun Chat. Toodaloo.
Bye-bye.
Bye.